Last night, I had a dream. It was meaningful and important, and I'm relatively sure it was prophetic. I think it has a lot to do with our future and the future of our world and your destiny and the future of our church, and I really want you to know about it. My sermon today is entitled Daniel and the Sovereign God. It's based on chapter 2 of the book of Daniel. What a wonderful chapter of scripture it is. As you know, I love the book of Daniel. I love the aspects of prophecy and the way Daniel's example shows us how to live the Christian life, even though he lived long before Jesus. And if I did this right about now, you're tuning me out because you just want to know what I dreamed. Well, I'm not going to tell you. I want you to tell me what I dreamed. I mean, if it's that important to you, you tell me what I dreamed. Okay, here's the truth. I didn't really have a dream. Oh, I was hoping for one, and I'm hoping it was a doozy, but this really isn't about my dream. I just wanted you to get an idea of what Daniel was up against. And look at Daniel chapter 2, starting with verse 1. It says this: In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Now that seems like a reasonable request, right? At least for this time. Nebuchadnezzar was essentially king of the world. He employed these people who deal in the supernatural to tell him and help him and advise him. And yes, the vast majority of them dealt in the dark arts and are tapped into evil spiritual powers. But remember, Nebuchadnezzar is not a believer. He thinks he is a god. And as a king who thinks he's a god, he feels he can be demanding as he wants. He's had a dream, and he doesn't understand it, but that's okay. He pays people to do that for him. So the magicians and astrologers hear this, and they're ready to hear the dream so they can get to work. Look at verse 4. It says, Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Now, if you know the story, you know what happens next, but pretend you don't. Is this a reasonable question? Is this a reasonable request? Yes. I mean, these guys dabble in darkness, I know that, and I know they're sold out to evil spirits, and we may not really want to give them much grace, but I have to here. See, if you came to me and you wanted me to interpret a dream, and I'm not saying I have that gift, but I do know the Holy Spirit gives that ability to some people when he wants to. And if God wanted you to know what the dream meant, he might tell me. But the first thing I would want is for you to tell me the dream. I mean, that's reasonable. If you want me to interpret a dream, I have to know what you dreamt. Well, maybe this is because I'm a pastor. And I try really hard to be reasonable, and Nebuchadnezzar is a king, and he has no reason to be reasonable. But he has this different point of view. Look at verse 5. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Sounds reasonable, right? No, it's not reasonable at all. But this lets you in on the character of the king. He wants what he wants, and he wants it now. Give him what he wants, and he will reward you handsomely. But if you don't give him exactly what he wants, he will kill you, chop you into bite-sized pieces, and demolish your house. And what he wants is so unreasonable that there's virtually no way and no hope of getting it right. So they try again, verse 7. Once more, they replied, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. In other words, come on, your majesty, be reasonable. Just tell us the dream. Well, of course, that makes the king see the error of his ways, right? No. The king doubles down. Then the king answered, I am certain that you're trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. Now, is the king being unreasonable? Yes. But there's something else here. Before I go any further, let me explain what I'm doing. I'm sharing a story, a Bible story, a story that I believe is true. A story that some of you know very well, so you know what happens next. Rest assured, so do I. But I'm telling this verse by verse, and I'm letting the story unfold naturally, okay? And I'm not yet to the parts you might be thinking of. In other words, we will soon get to what you're thinking of, but we're not there yet, okay? I'll get there. But in the meantime, work with me. Who is Nebuchadnezzar talking to? He's talking to some of his advisors. These are people who he pays to advise him on spiritual matters. Now, not holy spiritual matters, but spiritual matters nonetheless. And what you're seeing here are trust issues. Think about it. Besides advisors, who are these guys? They're magicians, they're enchanters, they're astrologers, they're sorcerers. And when you hear that word magicians, I don't want you to think of the guys at kids' birthday parties. Those are illusionists. Those are people who do tricks to amuse and entertain. And we all know it. We may not be able to figure out how they do it, but we know there's something very natural that's happening there that just looks supernatural. Nebuchadnezzar's magicians are tapping into black magic. They're dealing in the dark arts. The astrologers are dabbling in other forms of false religion. So in effect, what we see is all the advisors in that room are deriving their powers from the father of lies, from Satan himself. Should Nebuchadnezzar trust them? No, not at all. This impossible thing that Nebuchadnezzar is asking is because he knows these guys can't be trusted. He has advisors he can't trust to give him a good interpretation. And he may not realize this part yet, but the reason for that is they're being guided by evil. He's overly demanding, and I'll admit, if someone was constantly telling me that they were going to cut me into pieces and turn my house into a pile of rubble, I'd be tempted to tell him exactly what he wants to hear too. But he's also right not to trust them. And folks, we live in a similar world. Can you trust everything you see? No. Do you trust everything you hear on the news or see on the internet? You shouldn't. I mean, I know the old saying, if it's on the internet, it has to be true. But no. In our day and age, we need to consider the source. We need to look for patterns of integrity and trustworthy behavior. Is all media corrupt? Of course not. There are some wonderful God-fearing people in the media. But you do need to check what you hear. You need to follow the money and consider the source and compare what you hear with what you know to be true. Look at verse 10. The astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult." That may be the truest thing these guys have said. And they're still wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. No king has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. Well, maybe they should have, because these folks are not to be trusted. Their source is a liar and the father of lies, then and now. Look, I don't know if anyone here is actually doing this, but whatever you do not consult psychics and do not get into astrology. The best psychics are frauds. They're the most harmless ones. The worst are tapping into evil forces and letting them loose in your life. You're taking advice from the forces of evil. Am I saying that psychics are evil? Not necessarily. They may not know what they're messing with, but they're inviting the forces of evil into their lives, and that will never end well. And then at the end of verse 11, they get it wrong again. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. They think the gods do not live among humans. Do their false god live among humans? I would think that in some cases they do, because their gods are idols and the forces of evil. The idols don't live at all, and I wish the forces of evil would leave us alone. Regardless, they're looking to the wrong gods. There is a God who sticks closer than a brother, who is actively involved in humanity throughout all time. And this is the God who is about to reveal himself to them. Look at verse 12. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men in Babylon. So there's a death warrant on all the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, sorcerers. And there are about to be a lot of piles of rubble in Babylon. But then look at verse 13. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. Wait, Daniel's included in this? Yes. You remember last week when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were seen as 10 times better than the magicians, enchanters, and astrologers. And of course, we know that the reason for that was because they weren't magicians, enchanters, and astrologers. But the king didn't understand the difference. So for now, for some reason, they were not in the room that day. This is obvious because someone had to be sent to look for them. And in later verses, what happened had to be explained to Daniel. Where were they? We don't know. But it's likely that as the king's most trusted advisors, they were probably out doing kingdom business. Nonetheless, when the king says kill them all, even Daniel and his friends are included. So Daniel went to the king to ask for time. And he told the king he would tell him what the dream was and interpret it. From there, verses 17 and 18 tell us, then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from God, from the God of heaven, concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Over the night, God revealed both the dream and the interpretation. And Daniel praised God and went to this guy Arioch. He was the one who was appointed to execute the wise men. And he said, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. In verse 26 it says, the king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Listen to Daniel's response. This is important and it's telling. Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. Now, before we go into the vision, we need to think about something. Remember, the people of Judah were taken in captivity by the Babylonians. Even though the Babylonians were, for all intents and purposes, much worse than the people of Judah. This is a time of punishment for Judah, but God is still with them. At the moment, God's chosen people are being ruled by a king who is primarily advised by people who are empowered by the powers of darkness. In doing what God is about to do, he is using Daniel to show that he is far superior to the gods of the Babylonians. Remember, the theme of this book is God's sovereignty over history. Well, God is about to show the king of the world who the real king of the world is. In verse 30, it says, as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. In other words, Daniel's saying, I'm no better than anybody else, but the God of the universe wants you to understand what he is showing you. Daniel is showing Nebuchadnezzar that there is only one God and that he is intimately involved in the world and in people's lives. Now I'd like to look at the dream, starting with verse 31. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold. Its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron, partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of clay and iron and smashed them. Then the iron and clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold, were broken to pieces and became like chaff on the threshing room floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, right after Daniel told the king the dream, and by the way, we can tell by the context, that's what the king dreamed. He got it exactly. And then he began to interpret it. He says, this was the dream in verse 36. And now we will interpret it to the king, who's we, probably Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Your majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them. You are that head of gold. This sounds like praise for Nebuchadnezzar, and it is. But notice there's something else. Daniel is reminding him there is a reason for his power. He didn't earn it. It was given to him. This wasn't because he was worthy. It was because God had a plan and a purpose for his life. The same, it can be said of us. When we reach success, we may have worked hard. But everything we have, from the air we breathe on down, has been given to us by God. There are no self-made people, folks. We have all been made by God. And God deserves the glory for everything that happens. Nebuchadnezzar and his empire are the head of gold, but only because God made him head for a time. After you, another kingdom, verse 39 says, will arise. Inferior to yours, that's the silver kingdom, the Medo-Persians who came to power in 539 BC. And they're represented by the silver arms and chest of the statue. In just a relatively short time, the Medo-Persian Empire will conquer the Babylonians and take over. The rest of verse 39 talks about the Bronze Kingdom. A third kingdom, it says, one of bronze will rule over the whole earth. And bronze is an alloy. You get it when you combine copper and tin. It's harder than gold and silver. This is the Greek Empire, led by Alexander the Great, who came into power in 331 BC. They took over most of the known world, and it was Alexander's mission to turn the whole world Greek. So dominant was his rule that when the Romans took over somewhere between 146 and 27 BC, as we'll see in the next verse, Greek was still the language of commerce, even in the Roman Empire. Verse 40 describes the Romans pretty accurately. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Rome came in forcefully and took over. They dominated the world. Now remember, this is a dream that was given to the king, a dream that showed the future, how empires would rise and fall. And by the way, they happened just as God showed him and just as Daniel interpreted. There is one more part to the dream. In verse 41, it says, just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. So this last empire is heavily Roman influenced, but weaker because it's divided. There is a lot of debate about what these feet actually represent. Some say the 10 toes represent 10 kingdoms. But the point is, iron and clay don't mix. And so there will be tremendous upheaval. I don't know exactly what this element of the dream represents, but if I had my guess, I would say this represents the time we are living in now. We live in a world that is still highly influenced by Rome. Even the structure of our government is highly influenced by the structure of the Roman Republic. The world is not united, but divided. And it's at this time when a large rock, not cut by human hands, strikes the statue and destroys it. And the wind blows it away like chaff. That symbol in itself is huge. See, when the people of their day were processing wheat, they would winnow it. And basically what that means is they would throw the grain in the air, and the wind would blow away the useless hulls of the wheat, leaving the valuable grains behind. And basically, this rock is going to do the same thing with the kingdoms of the world. They will be blown away, and the rock will become a mountain that fills the whole earth. Daniel explained what that meant as well. In verse 44, he says, "In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke iron, bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces." The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation trustworthy. Now we'll soon see that Daniel got the dream exactly right. Further, history proves his interpretation of the dream happened precisely as he said, because this is no mere enchanter, astrologer, sorcerer, or magician. This is a man empowered by the power of God. And just as the first four empires rose and fell, just as the God who is sovereign over history proclaimed, Jesus came and ushered in a sort of fifth empire, the kingdom of God. And it is an empire that will one day cover the whole earth and the heavens beyond forever. Look at verse 46. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor, and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. Then the king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. Now, this is also important." The king of the world falls face down before Daniel. We're not worthy, right? He falls face down before Daniel, but notice something else. It's not Daniel he's praising. And the reason for that is simple. Daniel went to great lengths all along to make sure that whatever happened, God got the glory. In every step of the way, Daniel was quick to tell that all that was done in God's power. This showed that the reason Daniel succeeded, where all the enchanters and magicians and sorcerers and astrologers failed, was because he was connected to a superior source of power, to the superior source of power, the one and only true God. And then look at verses 48 and 49. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. You know what this sounds like to me? It sounds to me a lot like Joseph in Egypt. Think about it. There's a lot of comparison between the two. They were both very young. They were both in captivity, not of their choice. They were both used to interpret dreams. And they both rose to power, second only to the king. And the reason for that was simple. They both stayed faithful to God no matter what. This is so important for us to remember. We may find ourselves in difficult places. We may find ourselves living under leaders we don't like. But if we are faithful to God, he will make a way. Glory to his name. Amen.